The city of Ouagadougou sleeps in fragments. In its narrow alleyways and the vast stretches of its dusty roads, shadows move where light fears to go. Every night, they come closer, not the jackals howling in the Sahel wind, but men with phones, weapons, and whispered motives. For Captain Ibrahim Traore, sleep is not a right. It is a luxury his enemies do not afford him. His presidency was not born from ballot boxes or backroom deals. It was forged in the pressure cooker of revolution. In 2022, when others hesitated, Traoré rose. Young, fiercely intelligent, with a soldier's bearing and a philosopher's soul, he led a quiet mutiny against not just a failed government, but a system designed to keep Burkina Faso weak. But let's be clear. This story was never just about Burkina Faso. From the corridors of Paris to the polished war rooms of Washington, Captain Ibrahim Traoré became a signal. A crack in the system. A flicker in the matrix of Western influence. His defiance was small at first, cutting foreign military ties, turning down IMF deals, speaking openly of an Africa no longer on its knees. But each act grew louder, and the world listened. When Charles Michel, president of the European Council, made his remarks, casual to some, calculated to others, warning of uncontrolled African destabilization, they triggered a chain reaction far more volatile than the world expected. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin saw opportunity. In Washington, alarm bells rang. And in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré simply tightened his grip. If this message resonates with you, take a second to like this video. It helps more people see it. The idea that Putin might plot retaliation against America through African upheaval might sound absurd, until you see what's unfolding on the ground. For 2 years now, Traoré has survived 15 assassination attempts. Let that sink in. 15. Each time, the bullets missed, but the message landed: you're not supposed to exist. Not like this. Not as a symbol of unbought African power. And yet, he walks. Shoulders squared, eyes alert. Surrounded not by armored convoys or foreign-trained bodyguards, but by a new kind of army. A quiet one. A people's army. The VDP. Volunteers for the defense of the homeland. These are not elite units. They are not polished, not refined. They are farmers who laid down hoes and picked up rifles. Students who once read textbooks and now decode enemy plans. Shopkeepers who traded receipts for reconnaissance. They are the reason Ouagadougou has not fallen. And they are the reason Traoré still draws breath. They began as village defenders, watchmen against the Islamist militants spreading across the Sahel. But now, they are something much more. They are the beating heart of a decentralized resistance. Their weapons may be crude, but their resolve is unshakable. And to Traoré, that loyalty is worth more than any military pact. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This story belongs to all of us. Foreign powers, however, do not look kindly on uncontrollable actors. France, once the colonial puppeteer, now whispers from the edge, fuming. Accused of sheltering coup plotters in Ivory Coast. Accused of funding dissent through proxies. No longer the friend. Now the foe. And America. America watches with growing unease. Officially, Traoré is concerning. Unofficially, he's contagious. That's why Michel's words mattered. Because when the West warns of instability, they often mean independence. And when they fear chaos, they usually mean control slipping through their fingers. Putin saw this. And like a veteran chess player, he moved. At the Russia-Africa summit, while others postured, Traoré spoke with thunderous calm. His voice did not waver, not when he declared that Africa must be free. Not when he spoke of buried riches drained by outsiders. Not when he accused the world of smothering African dreams beneath golden handcuffs. In that moment, Moscow nodded. Beijing took note. And Washington planned. If you believe the time for Africa to rise is now, subscribe and share this story. Because this is no longer about Burkina Faso. It is about what happens when the continent's weakest link becomes its loudest voice. And how global powers will respond when a young African captain begins to ignite a fire they thought long extinguished. Make no mistake, Traoré knows they're coming. He sees the diplomats shift. The headlines warp his name. The NGOs pull their strings. He doesn't speak of it often, but every reform he enacts whispers it. That's why the Presidential Guard was dismantled. Rebuilt. Not upgraded, reborn. No one remains unless they've passed loyalty tests that dig through generations. Soldiers are not just checked, they're known, their family trees mapped, their dreams measured. Mistakes are not corrected. They are removed. He calls it containment. Not of the enemy, of betrayal. Every betrayal he suffered came not from outside. It came from dinner tables, from old allies, from shared uniforms. That's the kind of betrayal that doesn't just wound, it haunts. Remember Thomas Sankara? So does Ibrahim Traore. And he refuses to be another fallen dream. He remembers how Sankara, young and brilliant, dared to say no. No to France. No to exploitation. No to silence. And how, within years, his voice was cut down not by a foreign bullet, but by a friend. So Traoré watches. He watches his ministers, his commanders, his neighbors. Every handshake is weighed. Every whisper archived. Some call this paranoia. But when you've dodged death 15 times, it's simply survival. Meanwhile, the biometric registration program moves forward. Publicly, it's about services, census, development. Privately, it's about surveillance. Traitors don't move freely anymore. Every SIM card is traceable. Every call catalogued. This is not dystopia. It is defense. Ask yourself, if you were in his place, surrounded by enemies, with foreign powers funding insurrection and corrupt generals buying soldiers like chess pieces, would you do anything less? He is not tightening control to rule. He is tightening control to survive. And every day he survives, the movement grows. Because this is not a government. It is a revolution. And revolutions do not ask for permission. They demand it. Right now, as we speak, the VDP expand across the nation, not just to fight terror, but to see everything. Every town has watchers. Every meeting, informants. Their loyalty is not to Traoré the man, it is to what he represents, a break from the past. A fight against those who sold their country for invitations to Paris and Washington. In this crucible, a question rises. What happens if Traoré falls? The enemies think the movement dies with him. But they're wrong. That's the genius of this invisible army. It does not need orders to resist. It resists because it remembers the poverty, the betrayals, the silent deaths before Traoré dared to shout. The revolution lives in them now. So even if the captain falls, the flame does not. And that, more than any missile or coup, is what the foreign powers truly fear. The belief that Africa can rise without them. Let that settle in your soul. The moment that belief becomes common, their system cracks. And maybe that's why, after Michel's comments, after Traoré's Russia visit, whispers started leaking that Putin, long accused of proxy wars and information games, may use African unrest to test America's resolve. Not directly. Never directly. But through chaos. Through distraction. Through a revolutionary storm started by a 35-year-old captain who refuses to die quietly. What does that mean for Burkina Faso? What does it mean for the world? The answers are not clear. The future is not safe. But one thing is undeniable. Africa is waking up. And those who fed off her sleep for centuries, they are finally afraid. If this moved you, if you felt the fire of a continent rising, share this story. Let your voice join the movement. The revolution is no longer silent. The air in Ouagadougou carries a weight, thick with expectation. The people walk with pride now, but also with purpose. They know what it means to live in a country at war not just with guns, but with ideas. And their president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, stands at the center of it all. Not a king, not a tyrant, but something rarer, a revolutionary with nothing to sell. The truth is, the war they're fighting doesn't always wear a uniform. It wears suits. It carries microphones. It sits in embassies and pretends to mediate. It speaks in polished headlines and policy memos. And it whispers through foreign think tanks that pretend to understand the African soul. That's why the stakes are no longer just national. They're existential. After Charles Michel's comment that Africa's growing instability could spread contagiously to the world, something snapped into place. It was a thinly veiled warning, wrapped in diplomatic language, but the meaning was clear to those paying attention. Western powers no longer see Africa as a burden. They see it as a threat. And when something becomes a threat, the gloves come off. In Togo, where the exiled Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba plots from luxury apartments, whispers of mercenary meetings stir the air. In Côte d'Ivoire, those who failed to kill Traoré on April 16, 2025, are not fugitives, they're guests. Honored. Federal protected. They dine in the homes of elites. They toast to foreign victories while Burkina Faso bleeds. These men are not rogues. They are pawns. Their loyalties are bought in euros, sometimes in promises, sometimes in fear. And at the edges of these chessboards, the hands that move the pieces are rarely African. The French know this game well. The Americans know it better. But in the halls of the Kremlin, Putin has watched it for decades, and now, with the world distracted and America overstretched, he sees in Africa not just opportunity, but leverage. If that feels far-fetched to you, look closer. Ask yourself, why of all the African leaders who seized power in the Sahel, Mali, Niger, Chad, Gabon, is Traoré the one who faces this level of sustained attack? Why are 15 assassination attempts directed at him alone? Why does he face coups, infiltrations, foreign media campaigns, and ethnic unrest, while others continue relatively unbothered? The answer is simple. Because he didn't play the game. He tore up the playbook. He refused to be a placeholder. He refused to bow. And in doing so, he crossed the line from manageable African leader to dangerous symbol. The kind of symbol that inspires copycats. If you're still watching, take a breath with me. Let that thought land. This isn't about geopolitics. It's about a man who believed his people deserved to rule themselves. And the firestorm that belief unleashed. If this resonates with you, share this with someone who still believes in Africa. Because the truth is, Traoré's revolution is not fragile, it's just young. And youth terrifies the old guard. It is unpredictable. It is hungry. It is hard to kill. That's why Traoré knew he couldn't rely on old structures. They were already compromised. Instead, he created new ones, quietly, surgically, and without apology. He began with his immediate circle. No one was above scrutiny. Not ministers, not generals, not the childhood friends who once shared meals with him under a single lamp. Everyone was reviewed. Everyone's allegiances tested, not just on paper, but in silence, in action, in the whispers between meetings. The old intelligence services were not enough. So he reactivated something long buried, the counter-espionage service. Originally built to monitor external enemies, it now turned inward. Not because Traoré mistrusted his people, but because he had seen the price of trusting too soon. One name haunted every step: Thomas Sankara. Killed not by CIA bullets, not by French snipers, but by a friend. A handshake turned knife. Blaise Compaoré, the man who smiled as Sankara died, still casts a long shadow. Traoré has studied that history, not with romanticism, but with steel. He refuses to die the same way. So now, in every corridor of power in Burkina Faso, there is silence where once there was chatter. People speak more carefully. They listen more closely. Because the message is clear: loyalty is not optional. This is not tyranny. This is a lesson learned in fire. And Traoré's enemies? They know this too. That's why they changed tactics. No longer just bullets and coups, but narrative warfare. A new headline appears in Paris: Traoré targets ethnic minorities. The Pula people, it says, are being persecuted. The story spreads like kerosene, picked up in Brussels, quoted in Washington, echoed in New York Times op-eds. And yet, in the streets of Ouagadougou, there is silence. Because those who live the truth don't need to yell it. No journalist in Burkina Faso found this ethnic cleansing. No aid group documented it. The accusations came from thousands of miles away, crafted not by truth, but by agenda. And what followed? Protests in France. Burkina Faso expats, many disconnected from the country's reality, demanded resignations, reforms, even foreign intervention. The media war had done its job. But Traoré did not flinch. He responded with facts, not fury. He walked the streets, met with the very communities he was accused of targeting. The footage was unglamorous. No grand speeches. Just presence. Just leadership. Tell us in the comments, do you believe African leaders deserve a voice in their own story? But this is where it gets even more dangerous. Because as the media spun its webs, the VDP were evolving. No longer just village defenders, they became watchers. Observers. Whisperers in marketplaces and mosques. They moved quietly, teachers, welders, retired mechanics, reporting not to a colonel, but directly to the presidential network. They became the immune system of a nation under siege. And it was this network that first uncovered the April 16th plot, a plan to remove Traoré in one coordinated strike, involving rogue generals, compromised soldiers, and foreign hands. The VDP didn't just report it. They stopped it. But stopping the plot was only the beginning. Traoré understood, survival was not enough. The entire communications infrastructure of Burkina Faso had to be rebuilt. No more outdated systems. No more unsecured networks. A new encrypted platform, layered, monitored, unbreachable, was launched under emergency orders. Every official channel now moves through it. Every message is watched. Every signal mapped. Critics howled. Surveillance state, they screamed from London, from Washington. But the people of Burkina Faso knew better. They'd seen the chaos before. They'd lived the decades of corruption and foreign meddling. They remembered the bombed villages, the false friends. To them, this was not oppression. This was protection. And so, with his inner circle tightened, his communications secure, and his grassroots army expanding, Traoré turned to the next phase of his doctrine. Biometric registration. Officially, it was a census. A national database. A push for efficiency. But underneath it all was something far more strategic. Now, movements could be tracked in real time. Not monthly. Not weekly. Instantly. Known plotters, suspected collaborators, former coup supporters, mapped and monitored. Their contacts flagged. Their meetings logged. Their escape routes blocked. This was no longer governance. It was counterinsurgency. And this is where Putin's interest deepened. Because a revolution this resilient, a resistance this organic, could not be allowed to win without consequence. For Russia, it was not about ideology. It was about opportunity. The enemy of your enemy becomes your pawn. A destabilized Sahel weakens the U.S. position in Africa. A successful anti-Western African movement sends ripples to Congo, Senegal, and beyond. Traoré may not want to be anyone's pawn, but he's already a piece on the board. And Putin, he plays a long game. So while Michel speaks in riddles and Washington debates sanctions, Russia invests quietly. Advisors, drones, signals intercept. A quiet hand beneath a loud revolution. And still, Traoré remains unfazed. He knows the rules of engagement have changed. This is no longer about ideology. It is about narrative control. Control the story, you control the outcome. And so he speaks less and acts more. He lets the people talk for him. He lets their actions show the world what sovereignty looks like when it wears dust, carries a radio, and bleeds for the soil beneath its feet. And the world is watching. Some with hope, others with fear. Because if Traoré survives, he will not just be a president. He will be proof. Proof that an African nation can rise, resist, and reclaim its destiny. Proof that foreign powers can be outmaneuvered not with tanks, but with truth. And proof that the revolution is no longer an echo of the past, but the anthem of the future. If you're still with us, take a moment. Share this with someone who still believes Africa's story should be written by Africans. The battle isn't over. But we're not backing down. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the cities sleep and the radio static hums across the dusty landscapes of the Sahel, there is a sense that something larger than politics stirs beneath the surface. It is not just a battle for power, nor even one for territory. It is a war for the soul of a continent. And at the heart of that war stands Captain Ibrahim Traoré. They say revolutions are made by the people. But what they forget is that revolutions are also kept alive by the people when the leader becomes a target. In Burkina Faso, that principle has taken form in flesh and blood. In the VDP, the volunteers for the defense of the homeland. What began as a modest civilian force now operates like a living nervous system, responsive, decentralized, and intensely loyal. The VDP is no longer just a security apparatus. It is a movement. In a time where militaries are riddled with corruption, where generals whisper to foreign ambassadors and soldiers are turned by cash and promises, the VDP stands apart. These are citizens who ask for nothing but a chance to defend what they've finally begun to own: their land, their voice, their future. They come from the villages that were forgotten by every government before this one. From the regions where roads were never paved and schools never built. They were the ones terrorized by jihadist groups while elites negotiated aid packages in European hotels. Now, armed with basic weapons but unshakable will, they patrol their towns not as soldiers, but as guardians. Traoré has given them a role that transcends traditional defense. They are not just protecting villages anymore, they are embedded in the arteries of the nation. In city councils, border checkpoints, even in state ministries, members of the VDP are now observers and defenders. They are eyes. They are ears. And increasingly, they are the spine of the revolution. Let that sink in. Imagine an entire nation where the most loyal protectors are not in uniform, not on payrolls, but among the people. Ready. Watching. Standing tall. If you're still watching, tell us in the comments where you are. The story of a free Africa belongs to all of us. Traoré understands that the old concept of national defense, of heavy tanks and top-down commands, is obsolete in a modern asymmetric war. His enemies do not wear flags. They wear business suits. They operate through NGOs, private contractors, media outlets, and whispers in diplomatic corridors. It's no longer about who has the most guns. It's about who controls the information, the narrative, and the allegiances that bind a nation together. And this is where the West made its greatest miscalculation. They underestimated the psychological depth of this revolution. To them, Traoré was another military man, temporary, brash, expendable. But they failed to see what he was actually building: a decentralized, loyalty-driven, ideologically armed society that does not crumble when one man falls. This is why the coup attempts keep coming. 10, to be precise. Each one more desperate. Each one more intricate. And the 10th, perhaps the most terrifying, did not come from within the military chain of command. It came from terrorist networks reactivated and refueled by foreign interest. Let's talk about Paul-Henri Damiba. Once deposed and exiled to Togo, Damiba did not fade. He adapted. From his safe harbor, he built a shadow alliance, one that pulled together disillusioned officers, sleeper cells within the army, and crucially, support from those in Côte d'Ivoire, where resentment toward Traoré's anti-French stance has been festering. This coalition chose Bachalogo, a crucial city near the capital, as their first strike. What followed was carnage. Hundreds were killed. Civilians, women, children. The streets ran with blood not because of war, but because of sabotage. It was never just a terrorist attack. It was a psychological offensive meant to fracture the public's faith in Traoré's ability to protect them. But it didn't work. Traoré responded not with vengeance, but with clarity. He arrested the plotters, dismantled the cells, and in the process, exposed one critical truth: foreign fingerprints were everywhere. This is not conspiracy. This is confirmed intelligence. Funding traced back to foreign accounts. Communications routed through embassies. And operational support linked, quietly but unmistakably, to France's military footprint in the region. All while the Western press remained silent, their focus conveniently locked on ethnic accusations and press freedom concerns. It begs the question: what do they fear more, Traoré's power or his example? Because Traoré's restraint is strategic. Unlike some autocrats, he does not rule by the gun. His greatest weapon is conviction. When the 10th coup attempt failed, he didn't unleash sweeping crackdowns. He didn't order mass arrests. He restructured. Every security protocol was re-evaluated. Every unit retrained. New counterinsurgency strategies were introduced. The Presidential Guard, rebuilt from scratch. Backgrounds of soldiers were rechecked. Family trees retraced. Foreign contacts scrutinized. And yet, even this was not enough. Traoré saw the battlefield for what it truly was: mental, cultural, and symbolic. So he turned to the final piece of his containment doctrine: identity control. The National Biometric Registration Program. To the casual observer, it looked like an administrative upgrade. But in reality, it is a revolutionary tool of sovereignty. For the first time in Burkina Faso's history, every citizen could be mapped, not to invade privacy, but to protect national integrity. Think of it, a nation that no longer relies on colonial census tools. No longer blind to movements, affiliations, or duplicity. One that can track the roots of sedition in real time. That can connect the dots between foreign diplomats and local unrest. Between rogue soldiers and encrypted financial flows. To many in the West, this is authoritarianism. To many in Burkina Faso, this is finally being seen. Because how can you defend a country when you don't even know who lives in it? But still, the criticism came. From think tanks in Brussels. From op-ed writers in New York. From diaspora activists who haven't walked a dusty street in Ouagadougou since they were teenagers. They called Traoré a dictator. A strongman. A paranoid general. But the truth is much harder to digest. He is a survivor. A man who knows his enemies are real, not imagined. Who knows that betrayal is not a hypothetical. It is a history that stains every corner of the African map. And so, while Putin watches and waits, perhaps even plots, as some now claim, Traoré builds. Not alliances. Not empires. But resilience. Because this is what the West doesn't understand. Africa is not looking for a savior. It is remembering it can save itself. And for once, the story is not being written in Paris, or Brussels, or DC. It is being lived, in blood and breath, in places like Kaya, Dori, Gawa, and Ouagadougou. In the prayers of mothers who lost sons to insurgents. In the hearts of farmers who picked up rifles not to kill, but to say, "This is our home." So as foreign analysts write reports and project instability curves, the people of Burkina Faso are building something that cannot be measured by GDP charts or democratic indexes. They are building a revolution of the spirit. And that is why the West is nervous. Because if this model spreads, if other nations decide they too can resist, can govern, can own their futures without IMF puppetry or military partnerships with strings attached, then the entire system begins to shake. And in the silence after the tremor, you will hear the voice of a man like Traoré. Not screaming, but standing. And in his presence, you will understand why they keep trying to kill him. If you believe Africa must stand on its own terms, not the world's expectations, share this message. Every voice added to this story is one less narrative stolen by outsiders. There is a quiet moment before every storm, a stillness so sharp it vibrates through the air like the warning hum of a distant engine. In Burkina Faso, that moment has passed. The storm has begun. But this is not a storm of thunder or rain. This is a storm of awakening. In the backrooms of Ouagadougou and across the blood-soaked plains of the Sahel, the revolution that Captain Ibrahim Traoré is leading has entered a new phase, irreversible, uncompromising, and deeply rooted in the people. The enemies that once sought to destabilize him with bullets and whispers have now turned to disinformation, to division, to psychological sabotage. The Western press floods digital feeds with headlines designed to fracture loyalties and sow confusion. They say he is corrupt. They say he is targeting ethnic minorities. They say he is working with Vladimir Putin to provoke global war. But the truth is far more dangerous to their interests than any lie they could invent. Because Traoré is not another dictator clinging to power. He is not a pawn to Moscow, nor a puppet of Beijing. He is something much more unpredictable, a leader who truly believes his people deserve to own their land, their resources, and their destiny. And that belief is a fire that cannot be snuffed out by editorials. Just weeks ago, after another wave of smears linked him to ethnic persecution of the Pool people, protests erupted, not in Burkina Faso, but in Paris. There, Burkinabe exiles took to the streets, demanding Traoré's resignation. But back home, the actual Pool communities marched too, in defense of the president. A contradiction the headlines conveniently omitted. Why? Because truth threatens the structure of control. In the eyes of global power, African unity is the ultimate threat. And when a president begins to transcend tribal lines, when he empowers the rural poor and lifts the dignity of the forgotten, he becomes more than a political leader. He becomes a mirror reflecting back to the West the legacy of exploitation they wish to forget. A mirror that shows other African nations that sovereignty is not just a dream, it is a discipline. If this reflection moves you, take a moment now. Share this message with someone who still sees Africa through colonial eyes. Let them hear what resistance sounds like. The biometric system, the containment doctrine, the surveillance of the elite, none of it was born out of power lust. It was born from pain, from betrayal, from watching trusted commanders sell secrets for weekend shopping trips in Abidjan, from seeing ministers smile in daylight and scheme by moonlight. This is not paranoia. This is history. And in this history, a new symbol has emerged. The VDP, once a militia of villagers with rusted rifles and aging uniforms, has now become a parallel nation. Not a threat to the state, but a guardian of it. In the forests of Bouclé du Mouhoun, in the mining corridors of Yaga, and in the dry grasslands of Sahel, they operate with a loyalty no paycheck can buy. They do not serve for medals. They serve because they believe. And that belief is everything. The traditional army has its structure, its traditions, but it also has its ghosts. Traoré knows this. That's why he entrusted the VDP with more than defense. He gave them eyes, he gave them ears, and he gave them access to the soul of the nation. In every province, the VDP now operate as informants, mediators, and sometimes judges. They report directly to the presidential palace, not because they are above the law, but because they are a new layer of it. When a VDP unit detects a strange vehicle in a remote village or overhears suspicious coordination near a telecom tower, the information moves through encrypted channels in real time. This isn't just citizen surveillance. It is citizen resistance. Some critics, particularly abroad, have called this authoritarian. But what those critics fail to see is the alternative. Without the VDP, the people would be defenseless, reliant on foreign peacekeeping missions that bring cameras and speeches, but rarely security. Ask the villagers of Djibo. Ask the mothers of Gorom Gorom. Ask them what happens when the National Army takes 3 days to respond, and the terrorists come in one. The VDP are the line. And that line is drawn not in politics, but in blood. Do you see what is being built? Traoré is not building a fortress around a president. He is building a citadel around a dream. And that dream is now protected not just by arms, but by hearts. That is why the coup plotters failed. That is why the media onslaught, the false accusations, and the pressure campaigns have yet to break him. Because every time they try, they show the world their hand. Every foreign-funded article, every distorted social media campaign, every diplomatic statement that expresses concern while ignoring the roots of the struggle. Each one makes the truth more obvious. They are afraid, not of Traoré as a man, but of what he represents if he survives. And while the West debates sanctions and spreads manufactured outrage, Russia waits. In Moscow, the old bear stretches, watching, calculating. Putin doesn't need to invade a country to strike at America anymore. He knows all he has to do is support what the US fears most, an African leader it can't control. One who will not bend to the usual economic strings or military traps. This is why analysts whisper now that Traoré is part of a bigger game, that Putin is fueling his resilience to shake the pillars of American dominance in the region. Not with tanks, with narratives, with alternatives, with proof that post-Western alignment is not only possible, but successful. And the terrifying thing, it might work, not because of Russian power, but because of Burkinabe will. The same will that fuels the VDP, the same will that stood unbroken after Bachalogo, the same will that sings in schoolyards and radio broadcasts. We will not kneel again. If you've made it this far, type "We stand" in the comments. Let them know Africa's voice is no longer whispered, it is shouted. Yet even Traoré knows this truth. A single man cannot hold the sky. And so, he prepares for the future. For a Burkina Faso that will not collapse if he is killed. He empowers governors. He decentralizes decision-making. He embeds loyalists in ministries, but not to control them, to preserve them. Because the real victory is not surviving another assassination attempt. It is making sure the revolution does. That is why the Ministry of the Interior has launched new programs. Reforms in education, national defense, and public administration, subtle but strategic. Traoré is weaving the revolution into policy, into infrastructure, into daily life. Not through ego, through legacy. The West doesn't know what to do with that. Because in their model, revolutions are either crushed quickly or corrupted slowly. But what do you do with a revolution that becomes self-sustaining? The answer: you fear it, and you do everything you can to make the world misunderstand it. That's what the headlines are for. That's what the expert panels on Western television are for. That's what the desperate accusations of Putin's shadow war are for. To confuse you, to distract you, to make you forget that the revolution isn't happening in backrooms or embassies. It's happening on the ground, in schools, in fields, in the watchful eyes of the VDP. And if you're reading this, watching this, feeling this, you're a part of it too. If you believe that revolution is not a threat, but a beginning, share this now. Let's make sure the world hears the story they're trying to bury. In the flicker of torchlight outside a small village near Fadan Gurma, a farmer tightens the strap on his rifle. He is not a soldier. He has no rank, no decorations. But tonight, like thousands of others across Burkina Faso, he takes his place in the silence, not to fight for a president, but to protect an idea. This is what the world still fails to understand. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not merely surviving a presidency. He is building a people-powered revolution that, for the first time in generations, doesn't wait for permission. And that revolution, though it may have started with a coup, has evolved into something no bullet can kill. By now, the pattern is obvious to anyone willing to see it. Each time Burkina Faso asserts itself, each time it breaks a foreign contract, refuses a Western demand, questions the motives of international agencies, a new headline appears. A new crisis surfaces. A new accusation is born. And trailing closely behind these headlines, like footprints in sand, are the same old powers: France, the US, corporate interests cloaked in humanitarian garb. All rattled by a leader they cannot buy, control, or replace. But they're too late. Because even if Traoré is taken tomorrow, the machine he has awakened will not stop. The VDP, born of desperation, now move with precision. Not rogue militias, but nodes in a national network. Their radios crackle with encrypted chatter. Their field reports flow into centralized databases. Their movements are tracked, logged, and trusted. They've become more than guardians. They are the conscience of the revolution. And they are not alone. Traoré has quietly cultivated a generation of believers, youth groups, local councillors, teachers, even traitors, each now a carrier of the revolutionary virus. They don't chant slogans. They build clinics. They report corruption. They protect secrets. They are the ones who ensure that if the regime is shaken, the foundation stays firm. And the rest of Africa is beginning to notice. In Mali, murals of Traoré appear alongside those of Thomas Sankara and Patrice Lumumba. In Niger, students cite him in public debates. In Senegal, whispers grow louder. What if we could do the same? That is what frightens the West the most. Not that Traoré has survived their plots, but that his defiance has become contagious. That's why Charles Michel's remarks weren't just words, they were warnings. And they didn't go unnoticed. Vladimir Putin, ever the opportunist, sees the tremor. He sees the panic. And to him, Burkina Faso is not just a dot on a map, it's a pressure point. A chance to test how fragile American dominance really is in the post-colonial world. How easy it would be to escalate a crisis without lifting a finger. To fuel the revolution just enough to make Washington overreact. To turn Traoré into both a symbol of African resistance and a tool of global realignment. And if America takes the bait, if it tries to intervene directly or indirectly, it risks igniting a chain reaction across the Sahel. One Putin could exploit. Not to win a war, but to rewrite the rules. This is no longer about geopolitics. It's a struggle for narrative supremacy. Burkina Faso has become the front line of a deeper global battle. Who gets to define what freedom looks like? Is it the carefully managed democracy wrapped in IMF contracts and foreign observers? Or is it something messier, riskier, but more authentic? In this new world, Traoré does not need to declare war to challenge power. His existence is the challenge. A young African, leading a grassroots revolution, resisting the West, outliving coups, and refusing to kneel, even in the face of assassination attempts, foreign-funded disinformation, and economic pressure. This is the paradox. He is accused of tyranny while defending his country from foreign dominance. He is painted as a puppet of Russia, while all he has ever demanded is African sovereignty. He is dismissed as unstable, while leading one of the most disciplined security overhauls in Burkina Faso's modern history. And still, he rises. There is a scene that repeats itself across Burkina Faso now. A shopkeeper hears a rumor and reports it to a local VDP. A schoolteacher teaches a class not just about math, but about dignity. A young girl, once afraid to walk to school, now wears a homemade bracelet that says "Revolution ou reign," revolution or nothing. These small things are not insignificant. They are the heartbeat of the future. And even if the media refuses to tell the story honestly, even if think tanks in Brussels and DC write it off as authoritarian drift, the truth is already out. The truth is this. The people of Burkina Faso do not want to be rescued. They want to be respected. And Traoré, he may not be perfect. He may not have the polish of a Western diplomat or the credentials of a World Bank favorite. But he walks his streets. He eats with his soldiers. He listens to the grief of widows and the warnings of elders. He leads from the front. When the bombs fall, he doesn't fly out. He stands up. And if that's dangerous to the world order, then maybe the world order was never meant to stand. To those still doubting, ask yourself this. How many leaders in history survived 10 coup attempts, dozens of betrayals, a regional disinformation war, terrorist plots, and still refused to bow? Traoré is not a threat because he wields power. He is a threat because he awakens it in others. That is why the people watch him. That is why children chant his name in the markets. That is why, in the middle of the night, farmers stand guard with rifles they should never have needed to hold, because for the first time, someone is holding the line with them. This is not just a political moment. This is a spiritual reckoning. A rebalancing of who gets to decide Africa's fate. And whether that fate belongs to the empires of old, or to the people rising now with dust on their boots and fire in their hearts. So if Putin is plotting anything, it is not because Traoré asked for it. It is because the world sees what happens when a single African nation starts to believe in itself. And that is the kind of belief no superpower can contain. If this story resonated with you, do not let it fade. Share it. Speak it. Let your voice rise with those who believe Africa's future should be written by her own people. The revolution is not coming. It is here.